Now it says that we are live.
Okay, we're live.
So, but what we need to do is to get Jeff back up, right?
Yes.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Amal Yemen guided tasting. Sorry for the short technical difficulty there, but we're live now, and I hope that everybody is ready to taste. I've got my coffees here. We've got all five. Before we start, I'd like to thank you all for joining this live tasting event and promise you that we're in for a massively fun experience over the next 30 minutes, followed by a very, very enlightening experience to come once we get into the main program. So without any other delay, I would like to show you a couple slides and talk very briefly about what we're going to be doing today. You all should have gotten an email with instructions to get the app going. My friends in the back room, could you please push out the slides? Here we go. So in order to start, I want to just quickly talk about a few elements of quality. Obviously, there are many, many, many different things that contribute to coffee quality, coffee taste, but some of them that take on a critical importance are these three: sweetness and the acids that we find in coffee that are a function of the organic fruit acids that exist in most coffees in different quantities and different assessments. And then we have clarity, which is a very critical element to think about, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But first, let's start with sweetness and acidity. In the app that you saw, which we'll speak about in just a moment, we've got a simplified form that was made specifically for this tasting. We're going to look at the beginning at what I like to call the foundation, which is the structure of the coffee, the sweetness and the acidity, and the relationship between the two. Oftentimes, if you think about lemonade or you think about some of the things that we like to find in nature, like an orange, there's always some degree of sweetness and some degree of acidity, and the relationship and balance between the two has a lot to do with how pleasurable the experience is. So when we get into this, we'll start looking deliberately at sweetness and acidity before we start looking at flavor. The second part of the job today is to look specifically at the tastes that we find, to sit back and observe and see what tastes jump out at you. Most of you may know this already, but a lot of the flavors that we get excited about in coffee are a function of the organic acids in coffee. And some of those acids are precisely the same acids that give some of our favorite fruits their flavors. So if you find citric acid or malic acid in a coffee and it reminds you of a lemon or an apple, you're not tripping. That's because those acids are there and delivering an experience that makes your brain think about those fruits. There are a lot of other organic acids in coffee, but we won't get into them now. The other thing I wanted to just briefly mention is this whole idea of clarity and resolution. Oftentimes we find coffees that have a lot of flavor, but those flavors can be muddled. They can be hard to get your head around. They can be sometimes hard to grasp because they don't articulate themselves very cleanly, or maybe they're bothered by some interference or some noise. And when you think about the way we look at TV today, you'll realize that it's come a long way, and so has coffee in that regard. A lot of the coffees that we find today in the world that are so clean and crisp and flavorful are the result of better processing technology, better care, better detail and attention to detail by farmers. And so if you think about when you used to watch sports in the 80s, if you're that old and watching sports now, you can tell the difference is astounding. And that's what we're going to see when we get into these coffees. So just quickly, for those of you who haven't used the form before, please think about sweetness and acidity on a scale from low to high. And with each coffee, just take a minute to rest and close your eyes, drink the coffee. Think individually about the sweetness and the acidity. Think about how they relate. Try to rate each coffee. And then begin to add descriptors in the bottom. You'll see that there's a place where you can press on the button and begin to collect descriptors. Once you've gotten a grip on the coffee, you can then go back to preference and decide. And we can do this relatively. Think about how much you like this coffee as compared to the others, as compared to other coffees you've had. And then we'll come back after about 8 minutes of tasting. Some of you may already be tasting, I hope so. And then we'll discuss these coffees. So without further ado, I'm going to leave you be it. I would like you to close your eyes for a minute, take a deep breath. Part of cupping and experiencing coffees at their fullest is a function of clearing your head of thoughts and distractions and really letting yourself be together with the coffee, really letting your attention be on the coffee itself and allowing yourself to be receptive to all the beauty that it has to give. So I'm going to play a little music for us to sit back. I'm going to turn off the camera for a minute. And we'll be back in 8 minutes to talk about the coffees. I hope everybody had an incredible experience with coffees. I know that I did. And just joining right now to check out some of the results. Oh my goodness. Well, I would like to ask everybody now to please push submit, finish up your tasting and push submit on your app so that we'll be able to see what you thought about these coffees. And meanwhile, I'm going to show you just a little bit of information about the coffees themselves. Have a look at this. You get push that. Mm-hmm. Strange coffee. Could you guys please push the visual up onto the screen? Sound is not good. Sound is garbage. Why should that be? Let me try something. Let me just try unplugging this. If that's any better. Is that any better? Okay. Could we look up at this screen, please? Let's push this up onto the screen for everybody to see it. So what I'd like to draw your attention to is this. These are the coffees that we're tasting. As you all know, coffees taste different for a lot of different reasons, but one of them is where they came from. The terroir, or the environment in which they're grown, and the specific climate and soil variables in those areas have a lot to do with determining how a coffee expresses its natural potential. These coffees that we have, these 5, come from 5 different parts of Yemen, called Beit Alal, Haraz, Wadi Majad, Bani Ofer, and Badan. And the reasons that they taste different are both because of the differences in climate and soils in the places they come from, but also the varieties themselves. If you see this little formula up at the top, GEM, what that refers to is genetics plus environment plus management. And those 3 variables together, and all of the variables that live within each of the categories, they collaborate to determine how any particular coffee tastes. These 5 coffees you can see come from different altitudes. They're from different genetic varieties and in different parts of the country. 2 of them, the first and the last, are both from part of Sana'a. The first 2 have one thing in common, which is the genetic varieties. And now that we have a little bit of background on the coffees and our heads are filled with information and our minds are filled with ideas about and memories of the taste, I want to take you over to this place right here. I'm going to share a different screen with you. It does feel weird sitting here talking to myself, but I know that there's a lot of you out there somewhere listening, so I hear your voices as whispers in my mind. Let's see, I see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people have entered their results so far. If there's more of you out there that have used the cupping form but have not yet submitted your results, please do so now. And that way we'll be able to get a good look at what everybody thought of these coffees. We have 5 minutes left, so I'm not going to take too much time waiting for more results. I'm just going to share this screen and we'll see what we get. Okay, are you guys seeing what I'm seeing? This is the cupping results. And what we can see here is that there was a very obvious favorite. This coffee from Haraz was by far the group favorite. I think I'll keep refreshing the screen, so if we get more people weighing in, we'll see that these numbers may change a little bit. And I'll tell you a little bit about what I thought of the coffees. Yes, look at that, we're getting better. One more refresh. So let's just look at a couple different things to begin to get our minds around these coffees. So first of all, if we look at just general preference, where these things ended up, this coffee, this Haraz, was by far the crowd favorite. It was personally my second favorite. And I'd like to drill down a little bit and see why might that be. If we look at these flavor descriptors, oftentimes you can predict how a coffee will be liked or received in terms of preference as a function of how many different positive flavor traits showed up. Here, the way these are displayed are traits that are generally considered negative traits show up in red, or traits that are sometimes on the more or the less desirable side of the flavor spectrum. Those show up in red. Those that don't have any red, this Haraz and this Bani Ofer Peaberry, the last 2 coffees, it's not surprising that those were 2 of the most liked. You can see both of them had floral traits. And floral traits often in coffee are things that coffee lovers go crazy for because they're hard to come by. They're not that common in coffee. They only manifest when that combination of environment and genetics allow them to. And oftentimes, even when they do manifest, they might get buried a little bit underneath some post-harvest processing impact. So here we see 2 examples where the florals did pop. What's the main difference between these coffees? Let's see. One of them looks like it was way more citric than the other, the Bani Ofer Peaberry. This coffee, number 4 in the row, had a lot of notes around lemon and honey, white grape, whereas the Haraz coffee showed up with a little more stone fruit, peach, mandarin orange. It's very sweet flavors. I see here this first one had notes of blueberry, which I know a lot of people associate with coffees that are of high altitude and dried with a natural process. I can tell you, let's do one refresh, and while we're doing the refresh, I'll let you have a peek at what some of the tasters who know these coffees very well had to say about them. But meanwhile, I'm curious if anything changed here. About the same. So if we look here, the Beit Halal coffee, let's talk about that one first, which was also, I don't know why I didn't get a ton of love in this cupping, but it was one of my personal favorites. I'm gonna have a little more. And I'm not, some of you who know me know I'm not a huge natural fan, but man, I've become one of late, especially when they're done so well and the resolution is very clear. Beit Alal, that coffee was described by some of the cuppers in Yemen as one that typically is among the highest scoring of all of the regions where they work. It's known to have a lot of berry flavors, and I think that showed up here in some of our notes. I found a lot of blackberry and blueberry. This one, the Wadi Mayad, is kind of the contrasting coffee in the group. I would say it's of a different, cut from a different cloth from a flavor perspective. This one is a lot more spicy. You find maybe some sweet tobacco, some cardamom, some fig, some lemongrass, and brown spice. You might find a little bit of apple or red grape in that one. This one, the Badan, is known to have tropical flavors. It's usually quite a lot more overtly citric than the others. Where these might be more like cherry and berry and stone fruit, this one tends to come across a little more citric. The Bani Affair coffee is a good combination, I think, of citrus and malic. And it is completely delicious, I would say. This Haraz coffee, which was everybody's, well, not everybody, but many of our favorite, was described by one of the Yemeni cuppers as being a coffee that reminds of coffees from Ethiopia that has some overlapping traits. And I thought that was true. I don't know if any of you guys felt the same way, but I found a lot of stone fruits and like sweet peach and mandarin orange and some grape, some green grape, some lychee, a lot of honey, some sweet florals. If we go back and we talk just about specifically the acidity and the sweetness and how they relate to one another, it may tell us something about, might be a good indicator to look at how these scores showed up. So, oh, and look at that. It came from behind, the Beit Alal rising from the depths to become the crowd favorite. That now was an impressive comeback. So, and I'm not surprised. I was predicting maybe that A and E and D would probably be the tops. The B, Wadi Mayad coffee, is oftentimes a coffee that takes a little while to get to love. It's not a profile that's very common in other countries, but that's also one of the things that makes it very interesting. I've come to like it more and more and more the more I've tasted it. But what did I want to show you? I want to show you this. So let's sort these simply from high to low in sweetness. It's not a surprise to, and shouldn't be a surprise to any of us, that the one that had the highest sweetness also were the top rated coffees. And the one with the lowest sweetness was the lowest rated. But something else that's very interesting is if you look at the relationship between sweetness and acidity, what you'll find is that if we sort by acidity, so the Haraz coffee, which I think is among the best here, is incredibly balanced. You have about a 0.4 difference between acidity and sweetness. So that's an indication that those two elements of the coffee are playing very well together. If you look at the Baran, what you'll see is there's about an equivalent, maybe 0.4 deviation between the two. Same thing goes for the Bani Ofer. And then when you get to the other two, the Beit Alal and the Wadi, that difference changes a lot. And this one especially. And I think that may explain to some degree one of the reasons why it fell below the others. It doesn't have quite the same harmony of flavor elements. And then when we talked about sweetness and acidity as a foundation. It does serve that purpose with a lot of coffees, allowing the flavors to sing and dance on top of a very solid, open and inviting structure. The sweetness is what allows the whole thing to come together. The acidity is what gives it its sparkle and its energy. And when those two things are in balance, the flavors have a better stage, let's say, to dance on. And if we go back to preference, let's just do one last. I know we got to sign off because there's a lot of people, maybe 1,000 people waiting outside to come in and be part of the rest of the program. So before we go any further, I'm going to just do one last tally. And look at that. The Wadi Majad came from way behind to come up. And I think that is a testament to also perhaps when people poured the coffees, because if you're drinking them really hot early on, these two coffees in particular do really well when they're hot. This one and this one tend to emerge. The flavors tend to emerge more as it cools down. And so you can see here's where we'll call this the final tally for the day. So the coffee that got the most love was this guy here. Oh no, which way am I looking? No, it's this guy right over here. And they almost went in descending order, which is interesting. So I hope that this session was enjoyable for you. I hope you're all very glad that you came. I'm sorry we don't have more time because I'm now realizing this should have been a 45-minute session. But I hope that it was interesting. I hope you continue drinking these coffees throughout the rest of the presentations. And look forward to more. We're going to do more tastings. This was an experimental one, a first stab at it, and they're going to get even more involved as we move along. So once again, thank you very much for showing up, for supporting the Amal Yemen project by purchasing the coffees, and I'll see you on the other side.
Hello, everyone. My name is Darren Daniel, and I'm the Executive Director for the Alliance for Coffee Excellence. It's a wonderful day to be here to finally kick off this event. I want to thank Jeff for that excellent tasting session. There were some really incredible coffees on the table. We just here in our lab here in Portland, Oregon, we're just cupping those a little bit earlier here before the event kicked off, and just excellent coffees. So also want to thank the musician Ahmed Al-Shaiba for the music prior to the event. You'll be hearing more of his music as we go through this jam-packed program. Welcome to everyone online and all over the world. I'm the director for the Alliance for Coffee Excellence here in Portland, as I said, and we are a Portland, Oregon-based organization and have been doing our work since 1999, trying to help producers around the world through our Cup of Excellence program. So we are delighted to be part of this excellent event and a call to action in support of Yemen, its culture, its coffee, and its wonderful traditions. Amal Yemen begins with an abundance of support from a wide array of organizations, coffee people, scholars, and historians. We have a very packed program, and before I kick it back over to Jeff, on behalf of ACE, we thank you for attending, buying raffle tickets, or bidding in our auction, and just simply for your curiosity and support to learn and discover Amal Yemen.
Well, thank you, Darren. My name is Jeff, and I'll be your host for this program today. We're blessed to have a lineup of expert speakers who've donated their time to be with us. But before we get into the program, I'd like to take a moment to recognize all of the people who've helped make this happen, starting with our Yemeni partners. This is your program. This was built specifically to benefit Yemeni people both inside of Yemen and outside of Yemen, and part of the diaspora. And the number of Yemeni businesses, individuals, companies, coffee and non-coffee companies that have been joining this have really contributed to what it's become. It started off something much, much, much different. I don't have the overlays. Do you guys have them? Okay. Let's just give a quick shout out to, first of all, well, let's start with the Amal Yemen auction and raffle donors. So, your contributions are deeply appreciated. Here's our Yemeni partners. This list has been growing constantly over the last couple weeks, last months really, but in the last few weeks it's spiked. And we've also got a huge number of auction and raffle donors that really need to be thanked for their willingness and eagerness, even I'd say, to join into the Amal Yemen program and donate stuff for us to raffle off and sell off to raise money for relief efforts that are ongoing in Yemen. I'd also like to thank the general coffee industry supporters. We're grateful for all of your inputs to get this off the ground. And last and certainly not least are the Yemeni artists, chefs, and musicians who have joined the Amal Yemeni community. I don't know if we have that slide available, but if we do, I'd love to throw it up there for a minute and have a look. We've got some incredible artists and musicians and chefs and content creators and bloggers and activists and people around the world, both inside and outside of Yemen, who are doing work every day that oftentimes has not been on the radar of a large global community. And we hope that Amal Yemen is one of the things that will change that. So I'm not going to take up much more of your time, but I do want to just tell you, Amal Yemen, for those of you who've joined us but haven't spent much time poking around in the website or don't really know the story, Amal Yemen it's a grassroots movement. It's not an event, but rather a large coalition and movement that aims to foster more connectivity between Yemeni people and the global community. And the explicit purpose of this is to help create economic opportunities for people around the world, Yemeni people inside and outside of the country, by bringing people closer together, making it easier for relationships to form. Oftentimes, opportunity is simply that. It's a function of access and relationships and engagement. As many of you are well aware, the Yemeni population has been subjected to tremendous hardship this past decade. And there's a humanitarian crisis that has unfolded in slow motion while much of the world has looked the other way. This project is about motivating people to pay attention with the knowledge that the closer they look, the more they will see past the conflict and appreciate all of the extraordinary output coming from a country that deserves to be seen. So on behalf of the entire Amal Yemen team, we thank you again for taking the time to be here and to listen and to share. So without any other delay, I'd like to welcome our first speaker to the stage. His name is Jonathan Morris. He's a professor of history at the University of Hertfordshire in the UK. He's also a vice president of the Royal Historical Society. And he's a well-known author of a book called Coffee, A Global History, which I'd highly recommend you all pick up if you haven't read it. He's also the co-presenter and the co-producer of the History of Coffee podcast. He's here to share some perspective with us on Yemen's role as the historic center of the global coffee trade. So welcome, Jonathan. Thank you for joining us.
Hi there, Jeff. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Fantastic. Great. Okay, I'm ready to roll if you're ready for me to get on with it. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. I hope this is going to work. We managed it in rehearsal.
Okay, well, it looks like we had just a little technical difficulty, but let's all take a moment to take another sip of our coffee if we have one. It looks like maybe Jonathan dropped off, but that's okay. I'm sure he'll be back. In the meantime, I would also like to let you know that we're going to make a quick move. We're going to pivot straight into the recorded video from Ahmed Al-Muallim. So that'll give Jonathan time to get back online. Ahmed Al-Muallim, he had to record this video because he's in Sana'a. He doesn't have a great connection, and he's delivering the presentation in Arabic, so we've translated it. Ahmed Al-Muallim is the Director General for the National Center for Coffee Research in Yemen. He's a plant breeding specialist and a national expert in genetic improvement and value chains. He's also an activist who works to help uplift rural Yemeni communities. So I'd like to please welcome via video from Sana'a, Ahmed Al-Muallim.
السلام عليكم. اسمي أحمد المعلم، مدير عام مركز أبحاث وتطوير البن اليمني. نشكركم جدا على هذه الاستضافة، ونتمنى لفعاليتكم التوفيق والنجاح. يعد محصول البن اليمني أحد أهم مصادر الدخل للأسرة الزراعية الريفية العاملة في البن، والتي حافظت على هذا الموروث القديم، والتي استمرت في العمل فيه على مدى هذه القرون من الأزمنة، تتوارثه جيلا بعد جيل. وخلال ال5 سنوات من أزمة اليمن الحالية ذهب السواد الأعظم من المزارعين الذين توقفت أنشطتهم وعادوا إلى زراعة البن من جديد وبتفاعل منقطع النظير. وفي ظل هذا التطور تم تأسيس مركز أبحاث وتطوير البن منذ عامين من الآن، في عام 2019، بهدف رفع مستوى الإنتاج كما ونوعا، بالإضافة إلى أن المركز سيكون دورا كبيرا في الاستفادة القصوى من التنوع الوراثي، خاصة بعد أن أظهرت دراسة القمة بأن هناك تنوع وتميز في المادة الوراثية اليمنية، والتي كانت باكورة خير بالنسبة لليمنيين، وسيتم البناء عليها في استكمال مشوار الاكتشافات والتحسين الوراثي، مستفيدين من هذا التنوع الذي تحظى به البيئات المتنوعة في اليمن. اليوم نحن في اليمن أمام إدراك كبير بأهمية القطاع، حيث يقود هذا الاهتمام تفاعل كبير بين المزارعين والقطاع الخاص والقطاع الحكومي، والذي كان من أهم مخرجاته تأسيس المركز، بالإضافة إلى وضع الاستراتيجيات والخطط القصيرة والطويلة الأمد. كما أن هناك نشاط أيضا فاعل للشركات الحديثة المصدرة التي استطاعت الوصول بسلاسل القيمة إلى أعلى مستوى من الجودة، وهذه الشركات أيضا تقف جنبا إلى جنب مع المزارعين وتقدم لهم المساعدات، بالإضافة إلى أنها بدأت تؤازر عمل مركز البحوث، وأيضا ذهب البعض منها في عمل أنشطة بحثية في الميدان. وكان هذا البحث الذي سيتم مناقشته من قبل السيد منتجن الذي قامت به شركة القمة أيضا هو أحد هذه الأنشطة. بالرغم من الجهود الإنسانية التي تكفلت بها المنظمات الإنسانية في اليمن خلال ال5 سنوات الماضية، إلا أنه للأسف لم يكن لهذه التدخلات القدرة على الوصول إلى شرائح كثيرة من المزارعين الفقراء العاملين في الحقول وخاصة العاملين في قطاع البن. وبالرغم من الجهود الإنسانية إلا أن الحالة الإنسانية في اليمن تتدهور عاما بعد عام بدليل تزايد الاحتياج الإنساني، وهذا دليل على أن كبير على أن بالفعل لم تكن التدخلات الإنسانية قادرة على أنها تأخذ بيد اليمن ليتغلب على مشاكله والصعوبات التي تحيط به جراء هذه الأحداث، حيث أن الأحداث لم تكن وليدة هذه الخمس سنوات فقد. عاشت اليمن فترات أكبر من هذه الفترة وهي تعاني من ويلات الصراعات السياسية والحروب والأوبئة والأمراض والفقر ونقص التغذية، وفي الأخير جاءت جائحة كورونا أيضا لتحد من تدفق المساعدات الإنسانية لليمن. وبالتالي فإنه من المهم جدا أن نتحول إلى مرحلة أخرى من المساعدات، حيث يجب أن نعمل بحيث تكون هذه المساعدات قادرة على تمكين اليمن من الاعتماد على نفسه والتغلب على مشاكله وصعوباته واستغلال موارده استغلال الأمثال والحفاظ عليها. نتمنى أن تؤتي هذه الفعالية أكلها في أنها تلفت نظر المجتمع الدولي إلى أهمية النهوض بالقطاع الزراعي وخاصة قطاع البن، حيث أن اليمن تعتبر الأم لهذا المحصول وهي أفضل أرض ممكن أن نزرع فيها المحصول. ونتمنى أيضا من الشركات المستوردة أن تستورد وتستثمر في مجال البن في اليمن للمساعدة في هذه الجهود الدولية. وشكرا.
Okay. Wow. He had a lot of very important messages to say. Among them, the message that ultimately, when there is aid, international aid, it's never meant to be something that is there for any other reason than to help kickstart development or help people get out of a difficult situation. And one of the keys to the future is that Yemen is in a position to leverage all of its amazing natural resource and beauty, much of which comes from people. I'd like to welcome our next speaker who's joining us live from Yemen. His name is Fekri Al-Muafa. He is the national coordinator with the UNDP in Yemen. Before he joined the UNDP, that was precisely his job. He worked with an organization called SMEPS, which is a catalyst for small businesses throughout Yemen. And it is a very important part of Yemen's continual entrepreneurial drive. He's now working almost exclusively in coffee and has been working for the past 11 years studying coffee value chains in Yemen and elsewhere. He's also a big-time coffee fanatic, so we're very stoked to have you with us, Fekri. Please join us. We'll hope the connection is good. He's joining live from Sana'a.
Yes, Jeff.
Hey, there you are, Fekri. Yes. Welcome.
Yeah, hi. How are you?
Doing great. Doing great.
Thank you for the introduction. I think I'm not going to add anything in your introduction. So I think, can we move to the presentation? Jeff, can you hear me?
Yes, Fekri, it's coming. It is coming. There we go.
Yes. Value chain analysis is, just to give an introduction about it, as an analytical strategy tool. It's used to analyze business phases in the sector. The most important thing in the value chain are two things that the value chain try to achieve. which are the added value for the sector and the competitive advantage. To achieve that, the value chain development approach try to ensure that they change the behavior of the players in the sector. For example, we change the behavior of the farmers and the traders from the commercial coffee to the specialty coffee. So without changing behaviors, we cannot reach the added value and the competitive advantage among the players. The most important also thing I would like to talk about and use Amal initiatives, Amal Yemen initiative, is to say that unfortunately we don't have until now a comprehensive and updated value chain study for the whole coffee sector. All the value chains was done before was for specific areas, specific kind of coffee, but not for the whole sector. And the coffee value chain study is very important because it represents the reference document for any donor, anyone want to invest in coffee sector in Yemen. It is very important to have such a document. What I tried to do is to have to design the map of the value chain. The map is the magical tool of the value chain, which explains the whole narrative report of the study into one map. I would like to thank the UNDP office, Mocha Valley, many traders who helped me to gather the information so we can just explain a little bit about this map. I will try to make my explanation very short because such map need at least 1 hour to 1 hour and a half to explain. So here we have in the value chain map, we have the faces of the map, which is the input, production, process, trade, locally, and then we have process, trade, locally and also internationally, and then the end market. As the value chain should study any sector from the input supplies to the end consumer. So here we have two value chains, the commercial coffee sector, which is the traditional one. There was not that much updates in this sector, but also the one here with the shadow is a specialty coffee sector. For the commercial coffee sector, we can realize that we have the input suppliers, the seedling greenhouses, and then we have the farmers. In the value chain approach or modality, the size of each player explain its function. So for example, here we have those farmers do the picking and drying and transportation. While the farmers here, it's longer to the input phase, we realize that the farmers do the seedling and organic fertilizers. While those farmers, they don't do that. They get it from the input suppliers and from the seedling greenhouses. Then we have the relations with the trades, with which we have the collecting, local trading for the dried coffee cherries. So we have the wholesalers, and here we have the key player in the commercial coffee sector, which are the brokers and the collectors. You can realize that their relations are almost with every player in the processing and trading and markets. They sell the coffee to the wholesalers here, who sell the coffee to the exporters and then to the international markets. Sometimes that's why this arrow is not constant. Sometimes they sell to the exporters, but few quantities like 100 kg, 80 kg. And also they sell to the spices shops, also to another middle wholesalers and processors who do the hulling, milling, roasting, to the local coffee shops and end users, also to the exporters to the international markets. We have here another interesting key player, which is the semi-integrated commodity or commercial traders. They are semi-integrated. We can call them integrated if they are also in this phase. But since they are started from the middle, we call them semi-integrated, as they trade the coffee when it is still cherries. And then they do the processing, which is hulling, milling, packing, and then to the trade again as green beans and qashr. Also, they export. They have their point of sales in the region and in the international markets to the end consumers. For the specialty coffee sector, which is the interesting one, you can realize that here the farmers also what they have only one function, which is the farmers do the seedlings and the organic fertilizers and other agriculture products such as pruning. And pruning is very important to increase the productivity. Specialty farmers do the standard picking, which is also very important in the also play a big role in the cupping and grading. They sell the coffee to specialty. We call them producers slash exporters, because here this player, they dry the coffee or they support the farmers to dry the coffee with the international standards. Unlike in the commercial, the drying is 100% by the commercial farmers, but they don't practice the international standards. Then from here, they sell the coffee to specialty producers. Also, the farmers, they sell the coffee to integrated specialty coffee shops. Those are integrated because they start their rule from after the farmers directly to the end markets. And we realized recently a very good phenomena of opening coffee shops who are working in specialty coffee, and also they export specialty coffee, which is very good, and they increase the awareness of people to drink specialty coffee. Then we have the specialty wholesalers, and the good thing here, we realize in this sector that we have new ideas, new initiatives, new startup businesses start with coffee, like online small traders, either here locally, and also we have online traders who are working internationally, but they are still few of them are working. We don't have that much of such initiatives. We encourage these initiatives to be increased. Also, we have the micro lot traders. They start to work with micro lots, of course, with small quantities. Then we have the specialty exports to international markets. Also here, these figures are like the entities or NGOs that support the sector. We have the agricultural cooperatives, and they are under the input and production, which means their work is in these two phases: agriculture cooperative union. Also, we have organization support with fertilizers and any input supplies, like, for example, some UN agencies like the FAO and whoever. Then we have an NGO support the sector technically. It's like SMEPS, who is supporting the farmers, the process, the trade, build the links with the international markets. And of course, we have the Ministry of Agriculture, who are supporting mainly in the input and production, but recently they start to support in the trade and gather the traders for strategic and planning for the whole sector. And we have the MOT, Ministry of Industry and Trade, and Chamber of Commerces, who are now participating in some policies like importing non-Yemeni coffees. Also here, we have some also established, or it's as I know, only one private sector who are supporting the sector technically, like Mocha Valley, and we encourage also to increase those private sectors who support the sector technically. So this is in very brief what is the value chain now. Of course, if we will compare it with the value chain of Ethiopia, which I did a value chain there and I visited them, it's totally different than Ethiopia. It's bigger, more organized. Many entities are inside. Everyone is supporting each one. The horizontal and vertical linkages between the players are very strong. So that's what we encourage. And lastly, I would like to say we should have a comprehensive, updated value chain study in Yemen to be the reference for everyone, support to be also as a guideline and roadmap. Thank you very much. That's my part.
Thank you, Fekri. That was enlightening. It's one of the things, as a person who's worked in coffee most of my life, and I think I can probably speak for a lot of the people who are in this presentation as well, is that we've never had good understanding of the Yemeni supply chain. Doing this work is a huge value to both Yemeni producers, farmers, exporters, and also to the international markets that want to work more closely with those coffees. So thank you again for taking the time to tune in. What time is it there in Sana'a?
It's 9:30.
9:30
p.m. Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you being up at this time to be with us. And we're now going to, I think we got Jonathan back. So we can bring Jonathan back up on stage. Hey, welcome back, Jonathan.
Hey, Jeff, can you hear and see me?
I can hear you great. I can see you perfectly, and we can
Fantastic.
take it away.
Okay, right. So I'm hoping that my slides are being shared. Perhaps, Jeff, you could just tell me you can now see the slides?
Yes, I can see them perfectly.
Okay, excuse my terror after it's going down. Okay, so listen, once again, thanks very much to everybody for inviting me to take part in this event. It's a fantastic event and a very important cause. I want to talk about Yemen as the birthplace of coffee culture. And I guess we should start with the question of why are we talking about Yemen? Why is Yemen take that role? So as a historian, my my lodestone, my first big source for this is a manuscript written obviously in Arabic by a man called Al-Jaziri on coffee. He wrote it in 1556. And you see the manuscript there, the copy of the manuscript that we have currently in the Paris National Library. In it, Al-Jaziri says that the reason that Yemen first started importing coffee, which at that point would have been wild dried coffee cherries, probably from Ethiopia, was that there was a Sufi mystic, a man called Muhammad al-Dabani, who had traveled in his youth in Ethiopia. And when subsequently in Yemen there was a shortage of cat, which was used in the ceremonies known as daikas, the all-night ceremonies held by Sufis where they would worship God, said, well, okay, if we don't have cat, let's ship over some of this stuff from Ethiopia. And it becomes turned into a beverage called kisha. Now, kisha includes both the coffee husk and the coffee bean. You can see a picture of kisha there. And so they used kisha. Kisha became popular. It actually spread throughout the territories around the whole sort of Red Sea coastline, which were at that stage under the control or under the influence of the so-called Mamluks, who are a dynasty based in Egypt. So gradually this becomes the drink of Arabia. And the reason for that, or at least part of the reason, is of course that it is sanctioned by Islam. It's not an alcoholic beverage. It's a beverage that, as trials where there are sort of scholarly debates on this, but establish, this is something that keeps you awake and enables you to worship the Lord. So the complete contrast to alcohol, which would make you go to sleep and do things that you shouldn't. So for the first sort of 100 years or so, most of that coffee is coming in wild, in wild cherry foraged in Ethiopia. But in the 1540s, we start to see reports of coffee cultivation taking place in Yemen itself, in the mountains, in the highlands between Sana'a and the coastal plain of Tehama. And very much the kind of areas that we'll see the coffee lands around here. What happens is that it's grown by villagers, by peasants, and on the coffee terraces. They then sell the cherry. There's a huge number of intermediaries, and gradually it winds down, usually by mule, all the way down to here, Bait al-Fakir. Bait al-Fakir is where there is a kind of a huge wholesale trade market. That's where traders buy up big lots of coffee. They put them then on camel trains like this and take them down to the port of Mocha, Al-Mukhar. And interestingly, this takes place at the same time as the Ottoman Empire, based really in Turkey, and ousts Mamluk control from the Red Sea. And they are quite ruthless in exploiting the revenues that are generated by the coffee trade as a source of income, and in preserving, therefore, the monopoly of the coffee trade that they enjoy, so that all coffee at this point is being shipped through Mocha and Yemen. The result of that is that Mocha becomes effectively the world's coffee capital. Mocha, from the 1550s really through to the 1700s, is basically the world's leading, indeed the world's only entrepot for coffee. And the fascinating thing about that is, although the Ottomans themselves lose control of Mocha in 1636, when they're driven out by the Zaydi dynasty, which comes from those coffee highlands, Mocha as a system, Mocha as a port, continues to flourish as before, because the coffee trade really in this part of the world is organized by these merchants, the Banyan merchants, a trading sect from Gujarat, who finance the ships, finance the coffee trading and spice trading networks, but also finance, we think, the credit networks that extend all the way back up into the highlands that are responsible for bringing the coffee down. So they control the shipping. They ship around not just the Red Sea, but around the Arabian Sea, into the Persian Gulf, into the Indian Ocean. We also have the European, so-called European East Indian companies established to trade with the Middle East and the Far East, setting up trading presences in Mocha to try and get some of this coffee, initially not so much to trade back to Europe, but to trade themselves around the ocean as they pick up goods and drop off goods. And we can see here, this is a picture actually that was produced by a Dutch artist, and it features ships owned by the Dutch East Indian Company. You can see their flag here, and here is their flag on their warehouses in Mocha itself. Now, Mocha therefore became an extremely prosperous port. It's full of remarkable things. It has great architecture, wonderful merchants' houses. It has great ceremonial functions, particularly to greet the ships that bring in the sort of the well-known Banyan master brokers, who will frequently anchor offshore and will be given a 5-gun salute to salute them in. There'll be huge gains of exchanges of gifts, of florimolis and so forth. So Mocha, very much the world's coffee capital. What goes wrong? Well, in the 18th century, basically there's a rapid fall in the share of coffee coming from Yemen and Mocha in world markets. And that starts from the simple fact that the Europeans, of course, were able finally to obtain some coffee plants, which they took to their colonies, starting in 1696 with the Dutch in Java. And rapidly, therefore, the position of Mocha as the leading European supplier was lost. Probably even more important was that in the markets, the Islamic and regional markets in which Mocha had been so popular, there's a gradual switch in preference from coffee to tea. So places like India, Egypt, Iran, Persia, and Turkey, the Ottomans themselves. And also there is, as we can well imagine, a constraint on just how much coffee Mocha and Yemen can export. In the 1720s, Yemen's exporting about 15,000 tons. At that time, that's probably well over 90% of the world's supply. By the 1840s, we're still supporting somewhere in the region of 15,000 tons. By that point, it's about 3% of world supply. Now, there will be more up-to-date people than me, but my understanding is that in 2020, Yemen is probably producing still under about 20,000 tons of coffee. And of course, due to the difficulties of export, probably no more than about 6,000 tons are being exported. So Mocha has become, in terms of total coffee trade presence, a very marginalized area. But in terms of, as we were talking, in terms of the qualities, the distinctiveness of Yemen, there's so much that we should celebrate, but we should also celebrate something else. We should celebrate that this is the first coffee consumer culture that's created. It's the first place in which coffee is cultivated as opposed to simply foraged. It's the first place in which a coffee commodity chain, as it were, a value chain is set up. And it is basically the center of the world coffee trade for 150 years. So Yemen has an amazing coffee heritage, and I hope we can celebrate that today. I'm going to say thank you very much for listening. Thank you for letting me be part of this. I have written a bit about Yemen in the book and the coffee global history, and I also talk about Yemen in the first issue of our History of Coffee podcast. Do please follow up if you're interested, or follow up with me directly. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I think this is what I'm supposed to do, and hopefully you'll see me and we can say goodbye.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Hey.
That was very, very, very instructive. I think one of the things that often happens, or has happened circumstantially in the last 20 or 30 years of the coffee industry boom, is that people forget, or many don't even realize, that coffee consumption, coffee culture, coffee trade, all came out of the Arab world. And that it's something that Europeans and the rest of the world picked up on very, 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 very late in the game. So thank you again for that great presentation. I do encourage people to check out the book if you want to know more. And meanwhile, I'm going to now say goodbye and welcome Dr. Christophe Montagnon to the stage. He's tuning in from France. He's one of the world's most renowned coffee scientists and a specialist in tropical plants. He's also the founder of RD2 Vision, which is a company that's working to make impactful research and technology more accessible to farmers and to industry. So thank you for being with us, Christophe. Welcome.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for this kind presentation and introduction of myself. I'm so happy to be here with you and with all the people participating to this event. I'm really happy. I don't know if you are sharing my screen. Yes, I can see that. Okay, so again, thank you to all the organizers, the sponsors of this wonderful event. It's a real pleasure for me to give this presentation about the Yemenia genetic discovery and climate change, and also a lot of other stuff. First of all, let's go to a very basic question that might not be so obvious for everyone. Why is it that coffee genetics and varieties matter? It matters for a lot of reasons, of course, yield and productivity, but let's focus on three main reasons driving today, more than ever, the interest for coffee varieties. First of all, the search for cup quality. It is perceived for a long time that varieties impact cup quality. However, last year, I had the chance to work with Cup of Excellence, thanks Darren for that, and analyze their database over 20 years. It was the first statistically undisputable proof that the geisha variety, for instance, was bringing a significant increase in cup quality, all things being otherwise equal. Second, the genetic resistance for diseases. The rust epidemics, you can see pictures of how this fungus attacks the leaves. The rust epidemics in the Americas during the last decade was a wake-up call to the coffee community that varieties were losing their resistance to rust, and that some new genetic improvement was needed. Third, of course, is the climate change and the related challenges. Genetics and varieties might not be the silver bullet solution, but they will no doubt be a large contributor to the solution. We have a problem, and the problem is the following. While we need more and more of the genes in the Arabica species to solve some issues, it appears that Arabica has one of the lowest genetic diversity of all cultivated crops. This result comes from a groundbreaking study by Scalabrin and co-authors, which I was privileged to be one of them, last year in 2020. Hence, there is a need to make use of each and every bit of genetic diversity of Coffea arabica. But in order to make use of the genetic diversity, you need to know this genetic diversity. And in the next slide, I will show you why it was high time to look at the genetic diversity in Yemen. Let's take the time to visit the journey of Coffea arabica around the world. It all started long time ago in the quiet mountains of the southwestern Ethiopia. And then around 1400, it's difficult to be after Jonathan Morris to talk about these historical dates, but it might be 1500, 1500. The coffee seeds were introduced in Yemen, where the coffee cultivation started. In genetics, we call Ethiopia the center of origin, and we call Yemen the center of domestication. During 3 centuries, the Arabica coffee is grown in Yemen and Yemen only. Then, because of a rising demand for coffee and some European nations having access to colonial lands in the tropics, the coffee is smuggled out of Yemen. First, by the Indian pilgrim Baba Budan, who will bring seeds in the Indian region of Chikmagalur. This is what will become the Old Chicks Arabica population. From India, some seeds are brought by the Dutch to Asia. It is the Typica variety route. The Typica variety is almost immediately sent to the Americas via Europe. At the same time, at the same period, some seeds are also smuggled out of Yemen by French to the island of La Réunion, whose name at that time was the Bourbon Island. It will become the Bourbon variety. It will be cultivated 150 years in La Réunion before it arrives in the America through Brazil around 1850. Because it is more vigorous, Bourbon will replace Typica in the American continent. Only in some Caribbean islands like will Typica remain. One of the greatest examples is the Typica producing the Blue Mountain in Jamaica. Not before the end of the 19th century will coffee be grown in East Africa, in the south of Ethiopia. I call East Africa the melting pot of varieties, as varieties will come in East Africa from all the previous regions that we just described. You can clearly see through this table that Yemen has been the historical hub for the dispersion of coffee varieties around the world. Still, knowledge on genetic diversity in Yemen is really scarce. And it was high time to look into this country and see what is its genetic landscape. I will first give you some quick definitions here that might help you for the next part of this presentation. First, there is the species. Here, Coffea arabica, think about it as the earth. And then the species are subdivided into genetic mother populations. Think about it as continents. And finally, the varieties are deriving from the mother populations. Think about it as countries. Hence, all varieties are deriving from some mother populations. Sometimes you can cross some varieties from different mother populations and you get F1 hybrids. Don't be afraid of that slide. I will take the time to walk you through it. In fact, this slide is describing the work that I was honored to lead with Schema Coffee and was recently published in a scientific journal. On the left part of the slide, you have something looking like a tree. Each point of the tree is a variety. The varieties are clustering together based on their genetic similarity, and they are forming branches or continents or mother populations as we just defined them. The bottom part of the tree is made of Ethiopian coffee trees only, with several mother populations. The upper part of the tree includes most cultivated varieties worldwide in blue, and coffee trees from Yemen in red. You can see that Yemen coffees are spread across 3 mother populations. One is called SR34 because it includes It includes the famous variety bearing this name. One is called Typica Bourbon because these famous varieties are part of it. And you can see a mother population up left made of only Yemeni in red coffee trees. This mother population had never been observed or described. In the scientific paper, we called it New Yemen. The figure on the right of the graph is a different presentation of the same genetic pattern. The cycle on the bottom left of this graph is indicating a space only covered by this new mother population in Yemen. This new genetic mother population is commercially known as Yemeniya. It is a groundbreaking discovery. Of course, Yemeniya did not pop up last year. It was there maybe for the last 6 centuries, but we did not know it. We did not know how special and valuable it was. This summary poster is available on the website of Kima Coffee. I have not the time, of course, to detail it today, but I think it is a good reference to understand the travel and genetic origin of various coffee varieties. It shows how some few varieties escaped directly out of Ethiopia. The most famous variety is, of course, Geisha, but others, such as Java or Chiroso, can be cited. By the way, you might have heard of the Chiroso variety that won the Coffee Cup Excellence in Colombia with Felipe Henao. The rumor had it was a mutation from Caturra. However, I think fingerprinted it, and it appeared to be an Ethiopian landrace. Apart from these few varieties that escaped Ethiopia, all others transited through Yemen. However, one mother population never left Yemen, and that is Yemeniya. What are the main takeaway messages here? First, it is amazing, but it is true. Yemen is still hosting today the genetic diversity that it released to the world 3 centuries ago. On top of that, it is hosting a unique mother population that never went out of Yemen. The origin of the Yemeniya has not been found in Ethiopia yet. Maybe we will find it when we explore more Ethiopian populations. Or maybe it disappeared because of climate change or deforestation. We don't know by now. Why is this discovery so important for the coffee community? Not only Yemeniya is enlarging the genetic diversity of Coffea arabica species, but it is enlarging with a population that survived 6 centuries of tough climate in Yemen. It is then reasonable to think that we will find some climate resilient genes in that population. Of course, we need to go step by step in line with national and international genetic resources regulation, namely to respect the coffee communities that preserve the genetic diversity over centuries. The immediate added value for Yemen is important for the farmers. Indeed, this increased knowledge will allow to be aware of the genetics of the varieties and be more precise in the coffee seed sector. On top of all this, as shown in the Yemeni 2020 Cup of Excellence and recently in the opening of this event, the coffee produced from the Yemeni mother population genetic background has an outstanding cup. And with that, this is the end of my presentation. I thank you very much for your attention. It was really my pleasure to be part of this wonderful event.
Thank you, Christophe. That was unbelievable. I'm going to have to sit for a couple hours with that presentation and just digest the importance of it. You know, as any farmer knows, and of course anyone who's followed the work of World Coffee Research over the last years, you know, this is one of the biggest topics in coffee and certainly in specialty as well as, you know, as we search for more and more flavor in coffee, and we search for more coffees that are able to adapt and resist changes in the climate. You know, any new pool of genes is a invaluable treasure. So very exciting and also very meaningful for Yemen because, to have such an important resource there that is not in existence that we know of anywhere else. It also gives a huge opportunity for farmers to come out into the market with things that are not available elsewhere. So thank you, Christoph. We look forward to seeing you again. And I'm going to welcome to the stage our next speaker, who's the founder of Kima Coffee and one of the leading voices helping to reestablish Yemen as a renowned specialty coffee origin. His work is providing technical support and market access for Yemeni farmers and bringing Yemeni coffee into this global spotlight, which has led already to 2 successful auctions that have generated a lot of income for growers while helping Yemeni coffee reclaim its rightful status as one of the world's most exciting coffees. So please welcome Faris Shebani.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Hello, good morning, good evening, depends where everyone is. I'm first of all very proud, honored and pleased to be here. It's a real privilege to be part of Amal Yemen. Hope for Yemen represents something very deep for us, and so being part of this event and contributing holds significant personal meaning. So we've heard a lot about Yemen coffee, history, value chain, genetics, and I'm going to try and put all of this together in the next 10-12 minutes or so and say, well, what does this mean? What can this mean for Yemen? What can this mean for Yemen as an economy and for Yemeni farmers as people and as a livelihood generation? So let me share the presentation and hope it works smoothly. So the title is Yemen's Coffee Lands and the 2030 Coffee Vision for Yemen. And really the question, the statement is, how can we grow Yemen's coffee exports from a $20 million export generator to a $500 million generator? Now, to many that will seem strange and provocative, but hopefully over the next 10 minutes, you will see how that is tangible, feasible, and within reach. So where do we begin? We'll begin by looking back. We call coffee Yemen's buried treasure. It was once a source of national pride and represents a golden age. And today, as Jonathan mentioned, it represents nothing on the global scene. Yemeni coffee represents 0.1% of global coffee exports. And that's been down to a number of reasons that are far too detailed and complex to explain here, but this is where we are today. So the question is, what can we do about it and what needs to happen for it to improve? And if it improves, what can it improve to and what can it look like? So I'm going to take you through a snapshot of Yemen's coffee lands today. Really, what does Yemen's coffee landscape look like today? From a cup quality perspective, from a farmer perspective, farmer and economic perspective, and from a farm perspective. Starting with cup quality. Sorry, before I jump into anything, most of the data from this presentation is derived from a large-scale national survey that was done in Yemen. It was the first national coffee survey done. It was done by the Kima Foundation, RD2 Vision, and the Lavazza Foundation. And so appropriate credit needs to be given. And this is given some incredible insights, really, that were not available before. And this is the first time we share these insights publicly. So starting with the cup quality. It's no secret that only five or so years ago, Yemeni coffee quality had a problematic reputation that was connected with inconsistent quality or sometimes plain old bad quality. It was not uncommon to hear people, coffee industry professionals who would speak of inconsistent quality or just uncompetitive quality. And we discovered that was down to processing. Processing was the secret to unlocking the potential within the Yemeni cup. And so what's the proof in that pudding? Well, if you look at over the last 5 years, Yemeni coffees coming out of Yemen have been consistently scoring or achieving scores of 90 plus. And for those who are not familiar with specialty coffee, 90 plus really represents the creme de la creme of specialty coffee. It represents perhaps the top 1% of specialty coffee. And Yemeni coffee has been achieving that. And not only has it been achieving high scores, but as Jeff's session demonstrated, the tasting session earlier on, it's very diverse in the cup profile. So it's special. The cup quality is special, and we're in a good place when it comes to cup quality. Let's look at the farmer. What does the life and the livelihood of a Yemeni farmer look like? First of all, despite the collapse of Yemen's coffee industry, coffee still represents a significant contributor, a significant cash crop contributor for Yemen. And it represents 50% on average of total cash crops for Yemeni farmers, which is significant, especially considering the decline and the virtual collapse of the industry. And it's profitable. So the gross profit margin of a coffee tree is about 85%, which is really high compared to other coffee growing countries. So it's good news. It's good news. But, and there is a big but here, Yemeni coffee farmers are tiny. So let's look at how tiny they actually are. A typical Yemeni farmer, household member of a farming household represents 48 trees. If you compare that to Colombia, it's almost 7,000. Brazil, 12,500. So incomparable when it comes to scale. And what that means in terms of price, well, as I said earlier, coffee represents a significant cash crop generator for Yemeni farmers. So it's significant. And what that means is that farming households have to rely on that very small volume of coffee, to sustain themselves, to live sustainably over the entire year. And that is the fundamental driver of the high price point of Yemeni coffee. There are numerous drivers, complex and interrelated, but that is the fundamental driver. And I think it's an important takeaway message that coffee prices are linked to farm sizes, intrinsically, fundamentally. And let's look one level deeper into the farm. What does the Yemeni farm look like? Well, there are some significant agronomic constraints by way of water and organic matter. And this exists anywhere. If you want to grow coffee, you need the coffee tree, you need water, and you need fertilizer. But in Yemen, there are some specific constraints around that. Yemen, it's no secret that it's the world's driest coffee country. And so, again, it's no secret to find that 93% of Yemeni farmers rely on irrigation, and the vast majority complain of irrigation and water as the major constraints. And organic matter. Organic matter really being cattle, because fertilizers are hard and expensive to get in Yemen. So cattle play a central role in the life of a Yemeni farming household. We found that households that have cattle generate 15% higher net incomes in coffee. Why? Because the manure of the cattle is used for fertilization. But interestingly, the cattle is at the center of the Yemeni rural household, and there is significant demand for that organic matter. The household wants the organic matter to use it for cooking. So typically, the women in the household would want the organic matter to use it for cooking, and it would also be needed for farming. So there is this demand. It's a resource around which there is significant competition for. And these are the two main constraints on the Yemen farm level: water and organic matter. So what needs to happen to de-bottleneck all of those constraints? What is the strategy? What is the vision? And what are the steps that need to take place? And what can those steps achieve? So 3 simple steps: grow more coffee, grow the right coffee, and grow coffee better. What does that mean? Grow more coffee, first of all, very interestingly, we found that Yemeni farmer households have about 120% unplanted land. 120% increased capacity that's unplanted. Why is it not unplanted? Because it requires a small amount of investment to develop. And the Yemeni farm densities is quite low compared to global averages. It's 1,884 trees. That's significantly lower than most coffee growing origins. So that needs to improve. Coffee needs to be planted where there is fallow land, and where there is coffee planted, more coffee can be planted to increase density. Number 2, grow the right coffee. It's really interesting that Yemeni farmers today have nowhere to go to get good seedlings. So if I'm a farmer and I want to plant more coffee, I have no reliable place to go to. I can get coffee seedlings, but I have no idea what variety they are. And as Christoph explained, varieties are essential to coffee cultivation. And so a national seed sector needs to be developed in Yemen that can distribute the right coffee trees for the right circumstances and needs of the farmers. 3, grow coffee better. And what that means really is debottleneck your agronomic limitations. And as I explained earlier, that's by way of water and fertilization. How do you do water? Well, most Yemeni farmers rely on rainwater reservoirs to catch the rainwater so that they can use throughout the year. But currently they are far too expensive. Far too many expensive reservoirs are being built in Yemen. So a cheaper, innovative reservoir need to be built. And we're doing a lot of work around that. We're currently prototyping a reservoir that's 1/6 of the cost of conventional reservoirs. And innovative fertilization. Cattle being a very interesting option. It's an income generating asset. And it plays a central role in the household, and we've seen it directly impact net coffee incomes. If we do all of these things, what can Yemen's coffee industry look like? So we ran a scenario, and this is a very conservative scenario over the next 10 years that included increasing farm density, planting the fallow land that's available, and improving irrigation and fertilization techniques. And if that is done, and as I said, these are very conservative. This is a very conservative case study. Yemen's coffee production capacity can increase from 20,000 metric tons per year to 5 times that. What does that mean economically? That's a big number. What does it actually mean for Yemen as a country? Well, if we look at Yemen's total exports today, they're around $1.45 billion US. Petroleum represents around $950 million of that. Coffee represents $20 million of that. Tiny slither and declining year on year. If this is achieved, Yemeni coffee can represent conservatively about $520 million US of export value. And this is a game changer for Yemen as a country, needless to say, just by looking at the export makeup of the country today and how it could radically change through coffee. And that's nice to know for the country. What can it mean for the farmer? What can it mean for the lives and livelihoods of farmers in Yemen on the ground? It can increase household coffee incomes by 320%. So I put here the minimum wage to give a reference point. The minimum wage in Yemen today is around $400 per person over the year. And if you look at what coffee generates today for the household, and therefore the minimum wage and household income should not be compared like for like. It's just a reference point to give people an idea of what these figures mean. But an average coffee household today generates $1,800 around from coffee. If the vision that we presented is realized, then that can be increased by an extra 320%. And it could really, at $5,900, which would be what it represents, it could really move farmers out of poverty. It could take farmers out of poverty, especially when you take into account the other cash crops that make up the total income of farmers. And I think this is a nice place to stop. And to just take a step back and put this in the context of Amal Yemen. Coffee, we got into coffee because of hope for coffee in Yemen and because of the hope that what coffee can do for Yemen. And I think hope alone is not enough. Hope alone is really false hope. Hope needs to be combined with collective action. And I think that's what Amal Yemen represents. Here we are gathered together today to talk about coffee and talk about the hope that it inspires and collectively come together to enact positive impact. And I hope that's what comes out of this event. And I'm hopeful that it represents a new era for Yemeni coffee and for Yemen in general. Thank you very much for the attention, and thank you again for having me.
Faris, that was amazing and inspiring, and I thank you for sharing that vision. It's I think anybody who's worked in coffee at any degree with farmers understands just how important it is that we have people in the world working aggressively to figure out how to direct more income to the farm gate, to farmers specifically, because that's the key to sustaining rural economies. It's a key to building a more equitable industry. It's a key to ensuring that coffee production can be the source of livelihoods that it has been in the past and should be in the future. So thank you for all the work that you're doing. It's hugely important.
Thank you, Jeff.
I now like to take the great honor to welcome to the stage Nawal Al-Maghafi, who probably needs no introduction, but I'll give her one anyway. She's an award-winning journalist from the BBC who's been covering stories in the Middle East for nearly a decade, and is one of few who have traveled extensively throughout Yemen during the conflict to all areas, including Houthi-controlled areas. Her reporting is, I'm speaking as a fan as much as an MC, as empathetic, fearless, factual. And I'm not sure there's anyone more qualified to help us understand what's happening in Yemen today. So please welcome Nawal. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you for the introduction. It's been so wonderful to listen to everyone speak today, and for once to be a part of an event that is celebrating what's beautiful about Yemen and what Yemenis are most proud of, their culture and their heritage. So it's been absolutely wonderful to hear you all speak, and I'm quite disappointed that I get the part that's depressing, to tell you all about the conflict and the humanitarian crisis in Yemen. But I get it's really important to talk about that too, so that everyone has a complete picture of what's going on the ground. There's so much that is beautiful about Yemen, and we've heard a lot about that today. Like you said, Jeff, I've been reporting on Yemen for over 10 years now, and a lot of my work has focused on the war. But before becoming a journalist and before becoming a filmmaker, I am a Yemeni, and I grew up in Yemen, and I had such an incredible childhood in Sana'a. I lived in a farm where we grew our own coffee and we grew our own pomegranates and grapes. And it was such an incredible place to grow up in as a child back in the late 80s, 90s. And so it's made it incredibly hard to see what's happened to my home and to see the impact it's had on its people for the last 6 years. I mean, luckily I get to live in London now, and this is where I'm based. So I don't have to actually live through the war, but reporting on it has been incredibly hard. I've reported on the indiscriminate bombing by both sides. I've reported on the worsening humanitarian situation, the cholera epidemic, and most recently, a few months ago, I came back from Yemen where I was reporting on the coronavirus, something that's hit us all hard wherever we may be around the world. And every time I go to Yemen, I try to go around 2 times a year. I keep coming back thinking, surely things can't get any worse. But unfortunately, the situation does get worse every time, and it's been quite relentless for the people there the last couple of years. My last trip, like I said, was focused on covering the coronavirus. So I'm going to talk to you all about that. It's something that we can all relate to because we've all experienced it, no matter where we are in the world. But Yemen had such a unique experience with the coronavirus, and that's mainly because it was a country that had no choice but to ignore that the virus was spreading for many reasons. And I'll be talking to you about them today. So when we first started hearing about the coronavirus spreading around the world, immediately I was terrified by the thought of it reaching Yemen. I was in Amman, Jordan at the time, and very early on, flights to Yemen were stopped, even aid flights. And I think myself and others working on Yemen secretly hoped that this would mean there would be a chance that the coronavirus wouldn't reach Yemen, or at least that it would delay it so there was more time to prepare. But unfortunately, that was very wishful thinking. Yemen experienced its first wave of COVID-19 in April, May last year. And right now, as I'm talking to you today, Yemen is experiencing a very harsh second wave of COVID-19 spreading across the country. And my fears about how Yemen would react to coronavirus really came from witnessing firsthand how Yemen had dealt with a cholera epidemic in 2016, 2017. I went to Yemen during the height of the cholera epidemic, and I traveled across the country. But before heading to Yemen, I did research on cholera, and I learned that it was such an easily treatable disease. All it needed was clean water. So I really wasn't prepared for what I ended up filming. You know, what we saw when we were covering the cholera crisis was the farmers and the people in the villages in the high mountains across Yemen had been completely neglected. They were suffering and they were infected with cholera, but had no clue what it was that was killing the people on their land. The health system had been completely destroyed. People had to walk for hours to reach a hospital because of the conflict. Over half of Yemen's health system has been destroyed. And cholera, which is a very contagious disease, but much less contagious than the coronavirus, was also spreading in IDP camps, internally displaced people camps. You know, and these camps, which people have fled to as a result of the conflict, have been really fertile ground for the spread of disease. And also malnutrition. You know, this conflict has led to millions of people becoming severely malnourished. And that meant that most of the deaths that we saw as a result of the cholera epidemic were children. Nearly 60% of them were children. During the 1,500 recorded deaths and 1 million infections. And it was the same, the reason why I speak about the cholera epidemic, it's because it was the same elements that made Yemen more vulnerable to cholera that also make it more vulnerable to the coronavirus. And I'm just going to give you a highlight of the main things that are affecting the humanitarian situation in Yemen. You know, approximately 24 million Yemenis right now are in need of humanitarian assistance to access, you know, they need support to access safe water, basic sanitation, and hygiene facilities. And these are the most basic needs for us to be able to stop the spread of the virus. You know, basic things like washing your hands are a difficult task in Yemen because of the lack of access to clean water. And it's not just washing your hands. You know, who haven't been able to, children, they haven't been able to find clean water for their children. They haven't been able to use clean water for formula milk that they're getting from NGOs, and they're unable to breastfeed because they themselves are malnourished. And you know, this man-made disaster, and I say man-made because it's crucial to understand that this isn't as a result of some natural disaster. It's man-made, and it's as a result of this conflict. It's been brutal on civilians. You know, currently more than 20 million people are food insecure, and 7.4 million people have no idea where their next meal is coming from and are at risk of famine. And this is a country of around 30 million people. So we're talking around 2/3 of the population are suffering. Now, that also means that 7.4 million people have a weaker immune system. And as a result of malnutrition, it means that they'll be more susceptible to symptoms of COVID-19 and will need hospital care to survive it. And it's really sad because over 50%, like I mentioned earlier, of the hospitals have been destroyed in the conflict. What's incredible about Yemen is that when we hear all these numbers, and you know, they're terrifying numbers, but people have incredible coping mechanisms. You know, when you go to the villages, you'll see those who are poorer going to, for example, the people who have the big farms in the village, and basically going to them for help. And you know, they'll rely on their neighbors to give them whatever spare food they may have, and that's how people have been able to support each other. But the more that the farmers and those who were able to help the poor are suffering, coping mechanisms are now diminishing. And so they're having to solely rely on international NGOs to survive. You know, it's these numbers are terrifying prospects for the COVID-19 and for the Yemeni people, and it's really made it impossible, that means, for people to lock down during these times, because they are desperate to go outside and find food for their families. Food distributions by NGOs are incredibly difficult because queues for these food distributions are exposing people to the virus. And on top of all of this, the World Food Programme has had to cut its food distribution projects because of lack of funding. So that means that food distributed to last people for a month now has to last them for 2 months. You know, also as a result of this war, with 4.3 million people lose, all of them are now displaced across the country. Public services have broke down, and so a lot of public servants are no longer receiving salaries. And regardless of this, regardless of the fact that half the health system has been destroyed, in the last couple of months, we've seen a threefold increase on attacks against health facilities, which shows you the complete disregard by the warring factions about this imminent threat. I think everything I'm telling you is stuff that is, continuously kind of churned out on the media about Yemen on a daily basis. The other lectures that we heard today, what's beautiful about Yemen is the stuff that we don't usually hear. But now that you have the information you have about what's beautiful about Yemen and the hope that Yemen has, a disaster, you have the tools to kind of give people a complete picture about what's going on in the ground, on the ground in Yemen. When I went this time, it was so heartbreaking to see how terrified people were of coronavirus, but it was also, it was really sad to see how they had no choice but to act like everything was normal, to keep going on, to survive. Yemenis are incredibly resilient, even though life has become absolutely unbearable for them. But the only thing that gives them and me hope is seeing the solidarity, the collective solidarity of people around the world, the people, watching people like the people we've seen today promoting what is beautiful about Yemen. Today's event is coffee, so important. So supporting this in need is incredible. The way, the labeling of this event, Amal Yemen, Hope for Yemen, is incredibly fitting because it truly does show that Yemen has so much hope. That's everything I have to say, but I would love to take your questions later on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Nawal.
Sorry, a bit depressing.
I don't really know. I can imagine I speak for a lot of people on the feed that I feel almost speechless, just trying to contemplate the degree of urgent need and acute suffering is, it's sometimes just impossible to process, but that can't let us balk in our efforts to try to help however we can, in whatever small way we can. And I do want to, thank you for sharing everything as openly as you did, as acutely. Sometimes we hear about things that are happening in other parts of the world through some mainstream media sources that get chopped down into, bite-sized pieces that don't have the resonance or impact or urgency that they should. And so I'm really grateful that you took the time to be here with us and give us a first-hand view of just how critical the situation is and how much need there is, because it's, hope is eternal. As you said, there's a lot of reason to be hopeful. Yemeni people are as resilient as any in the world, but sometimes people run up against circumstances that were not part of their control, that that create truly existential threats. When we use those words, we don't use them lightly. It is truly an existential threat when people are dying every day because they can't get food or water or healthcare. So we're very grateful for that. I know it's hard to then move into the next segment. It's sometimes hard to.
But it is so important. It's also important, to celebrate what's beautiful about Yemen. And so I think even though it's hard, it's a great transition after that, because there is so much that is beautiful about Yemen, and that's what makes this event so important and so incredible, that we get to see that.
Yeah, that's really, it was one of the things that helped us get to this point we are with the event, is the understanding that as we look to both, immediate needs and future needs, one of the obstacles that will need to be overcome is just more engagement. The historic lack of engagement sometimes happens because people don't know, they don't understand other cultures well. They just haven't seen it. There's so much information overload in the world today. So making people aware of just how much richness there is in Yemeni culture, and not ancient culture, but modern culture is part of what this project is about. So, as we let everything sink in and process and digest everything we've heard today, I think there's no better way than to listen to some music. Music is uniquely good at helping restore our balance and enliven our spirits. So I'm going to say goodbye to Nawal for the moment. We'll see you in a few minutes in the Q&A. And I'd like to welcome Ahmed Al-Shaiba, who's joining us live from New York, from his studio. Hey, Ahmed, how are you doing?
Hey, Jeff. Good. How are you doing? How's everything?
I'm doing great. I've been waiting to hear you play all week. So, Ahmed, for those who haven't seen his work before, Ahmed is a completely self-taught musician. He was born and raised in Yemen, has been traveling the world, bringing music to people and helping more people appreciate the sonic majesty of the oud, which is an incredible instrument that doesn't show up very often. So we're grateful to have you here with us, Ahmed, and I'll stop talking and start listening.
All right, I'm really happy that I'm taking part of this event, because the wonderful speakers already covered almost everything about coffee. I'm just going to cover the relation between coffee and art and music, to be specific. Many Yemeni songs talk about coffee and talk about this spiritual peak of happiness that you will take your loved ones. Let me just increase the volume so you can hear me better. There you go. Okay. So the relation between coffee and music in Yemen, they sing about it. They write poetry, they write, these beautiful poems. And there's this specific dream of taking your loved one and sit on the beautiful view and drink coffee there together. So that's the kind of peak of spirituality. And while listening to music at the same time. So, it gives you that sort of high. And whenever they're going to sit and play music together or listen to music, they will have coffee. Coffee will be present all the time. And I remember when my mom's friends will come over, they will always bring with them just a huge kettle of coffee. And sometimes they're going to get creative with it. Let me see if I can. All right. I hope that you guys can hear me better now. And they will have some sort of comparison or competition that whose coffee is better. And sometimes they will get creative. Sometimes they would do this weird sort of coffee. I don't know what it's called, but it's coffee with almonds, just pieces of almonds and raisins. And it's just delicious, And when my mom would just also go visit her friends, she will make coffee. So they would sit, have fun, talk, and listen to music. So these two things, they go together because, the kind of stimulate the mind. My mom always says, nothing lifts my head up like a cup of coffee in the morning. So with music and coffee, you see the relation and how they go together all the time. So I'm going to play a piece of music that hopefully will resemble Hope, which is the title of this beautiful event. All right, here we go.
Oh man, that was incredible. I just, I guess I can also probably speak for most of the people here. As I wish we could demand an encore. And I didn't want that to ever stop. Thank you so much for
And
making the
thank you
time
for
to.
this event, and thanks to the wonderful speakers, and thanks for shedding a light on such a very, very important matter. You know, for Yemenis, it's really important, and for the world, it's also really, really important. Oh, wait, let me just take the reverb so you can hear me better. All right, there you go. So, I was saying that this is extremely important to Yemenis because we have a treasure, something that is as beautiful as this, and it should be shared and enjoyed with the world. So this is, you know, an important step, and I hope that it grows, and you know, the whole world starts to know more about the beautiful coffee that we have.
And music, and food,
and
art.
Everything.
Everything. You know, I think Mike's working on this project is probably reflective of most people's experience who've joined this movement. Is that, you know, the deeper you look, the more you see, the more you're exposed to, the deeper you fall in love with the coffees, with the art, with the music. It's so compelling. It's breathtaking, really. And again, I can't thank you enough for sharing. I hope we can do this again sometime soon. And meanwhile, if you're not needing to go right away, and I invite you to stick around for the Q&A. I'm going to now invite all of our speakers up onto the stage to talk a little bit, have some conversation. You guys may have questions for each other. I know that we've got a lot of questions from the group. Let me see. I'm going to try to pull them up while we're waiting for everybody to arrive. Wow, the gang's all here. Welcome back, everybody. Are we missing anybody? I think I see all the faces. Why did I get so big? Well, let's start. Let me ask before we jump into this session. First of all, are there any of you who are on a super tight schedule? Anybody have to leave in the next 10 minutes, or are we all good to stick around for the entirety of the Q&A? All good. Okay. Well, why don't we just take it from the top? We'll start with a question for our first speaker, Jonathan Morris. This question comes from John Craker. Is there any info on how valuable coffee was during the centuries in which Yemen controlled the trade compared to other crops that were traded globally? Or is any info, as a second part of the question, on how the Yemeni trade prevented smuggling of coffee seeds out of Yemen for so long?
Okay. On the second one, really the info I think there would be that because of the way that coffee was coming down to the market, because it would be being dried and processed, in effect, it was possible for the exporters and particularly the sort of the Ottoman customs duty people to make sure that there was no live product going out of the ports. What I would say about value was that I would say that you know, I'm not sure that I could give you a direct comparison, but I would say coffee was one of the most valuable crops. and that's one of the things that drives the desire for expanding the supply of coffee. And in a way, I think maybe if I give you a simple statistic that sort of in my head, if we think about even when I talked about the decline of coffee, in at that moment when sort of coffee breaks out, if I compare the price of coffee, Yemeni coffee, with coffee from Java, 1735. I'm going to do this in a strange version, which is sort of last year's US dollar comparison. But if you were to buy a pound of mocha in 1735, it would be $13.41. If you'd bought it as Java, it would be $9.24. So there's quite a privileged price on Yemeni coffee. The difficulty for that is that it tends to shrink as the global market grows, the differential shrinks. So by the 1760s, 1790s, sort of, Yemeni coffee is down to $7.30 a pound. Java is $6.54. Caribbean coffee is maybe $6. So that sort of price differential shrinks in the coffee market. But in terms of what the questioner was asking about, the value of coffee relative to other commodities, I think it's indicative of the value of coffee that those empires were so keen to control it, and so keen to sort of that we had so many different occupations, in fact, of mocha itself, the Mamluks, the Ottomans, the attempts to sort of exercise control through that. So I hope that gives some sort of sense of how valuable a commodity it was at that time.
It does. Yeah, I've read in some stories that there was a point in time in which coffee was more valuable than gold. And I don't have a hard time believing that, because I think if you think about yourself, if you became enamored with coffee, you started drinking coffee, and then all of a sudden it became unavailable, how much would you pay to get some? And there was a time when the whole world wanted coffee, and there was just so little being produced. I can imagine it being, beyond what we consider even reasonably valuable. Okay, so let's go now to a question for, do we have Fekri? Yes, I see Fekri's there. This is a question coming from Nala Guman. How will Amal Yemen contribute to expanding the scope of its work to inform Yemeni youth about the future of raw coffee? And this, I'll kind of redirect the question to you, is what can be done, is being done, will be done within Yemen to motivate young people to see coffee as a powerful and attractive source of employment and livelihood?
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can hear you well.
Yes, that's great. Yeah, for as I told you, when we did the value chain, and we had many sessions we are doing every month for youth who would like to know about coffee. I realized that many youth and the startup businesses started in coffee recently in Yemen. So when we started, now we have like a phenomena. We have to use this phenomena that everybody is hearing about coffee. Everybody wants to know how to do business in coffee. They realize the benefit of coffee and the value that they can get of coffee business. I remember when we had with SMEPS in 2010 the International Natural Sun-Dried Coffee Conference. At that time, just 10 years ago, that nobody cared about coffee and everybody was just thinking about other businesses. But now the awareness and the phenomena is happening of many initiatives, and I'm sure after Amal Yemen initiative that many youth will go there, because the sector in Yemen is still in the basic level. It's not matured yet. So there are a lot of opportunities now that everyone can engage, and there are many other sectors than or subsectors in the coffee than the export. For example, like coffee accessories. Now I realize that some businesses started with coffee accessories, and also we are still at the beginning in the, for example, the roasting. So we still have a lot of opportunities that startup youth could engage in the coffee sector.
Thank you, Fakri. Yeah, one of the things that is come across a lot in the last months looking at coffee in Yemen is there are a lot of research organizations, both within Yemen and outside of Yemen, who are pointing to coffee as, and I think Faris mentioned this in his talk, as one of the keys to economic recovery in Yemen post-conflict. It's one of the cash crops that can be grown very sustainably and at high export value if it finds the audiences that it needs. And there was a question that came in for Faris that was asking about, this came from Arvid. He said coffee was taken from Yemen before, and varieties like geisha were pretty much taken from Ethiopia and grown elsewhere and generating profit for farmers elsewhere. What can be done, if anything, to ensure that Yemenia and the genetics that are today unique to Yemen will benefit farmers in Yemen more than elsewhere?
Resources and benefit sharing of genetic resources to the original communities. These are part, I think, of international protocols, and they are protected in the international protocol. So I think it's important that there are systems in place to ensure that farmers' rights are protected. What specifically can be done with Yemenia, or how can Yemenia be used? I think it was part of I said implicit in the vision. In order to achieve the 2030 vision, as you said, there has to be an international market. There has to be international reception for Yemeni coffees, and part of that is to explain to the international market what's interesting about Yemeni coffee and why their appetite should increase for it, and finding. Discovering, identifying the genetic diversity that exists within Yemen is, I think, a vehicle for that. And then the real question lies in how are those benefits returned to farmers, not just genetically, but economically. I think genetically there are international protocols and policies to protect that economically. And I think that's where we get into the discussions of equitable trade and how do you ensure that the price that people pay at the cafe level are passed back, or a fair proportion of those is passed back to the farmers. And I think that's a whole discussion in and of itself. And then you get into the equitable trade and fair distribution of prices across the value chain. So I think it's a large topic, but I think genetics are protected. And then the real question is, how do you get the value of the genetics passed back to the farmers economically?
Fantastic. Okay, this next question will go to Nawal. This one is about media coverage around the crisis in Yemen. And the question is, why do you think the media doesn't cover the crisis in Yemen very deeply? And part two of that question is what can we do ourselves to help?
I think it's for multiple reasons. I think, unfortunately, Yemen's conflict came at a time where there were so many conflicts happening across the Middle East. And so people had become quite desensitized by watching more conflict news. You had Syria, Iraq, Libya, all these conflicts erupting across the Middle East. And the problem with Yemen is that people across the world don't actually have a lot of a background on Yemen's history or any context. And so a lot of the time when we want to cover Yemen on the news, it's really difficult to give people context as to how the situation got to the way it is. And because people don't know much about Yemen. And so editors would tend to decide not to cover it at all because there's just so much explaining to do. And that's what makes events like this really important, because it gives people context. It gives us a platform to tell people more about Yemen's history and culture and what's been lost. And so then next time you watch the news and it's a 3-minute package on the latest attack, or the humanitarian situation, you'll have a lot more context and background to the situation to help you understand it. But I think that's what they struggle with. I mean, at the BBC, we do cover it quite a lot, maybe not enough, but like I said, it is because there is just so much happening across the world. And unfortunately, Yemen gets put, at the bottom of the priority list. And that's a big problem, even though the UK and the US are heavily involved in the conflict.
Okay, and to the second part of that question.
How can people help?
This is something the whole panel can speak to. It's a question that comes up a lot. Is go ahead.
I mean, in terms of the humanitarian situation, number one, you're already helping by being a part of this event today and watching this event today and signing up to it. Of course, there are also a lot of NGOs on the ground that are working. I do, usually post what NGOs you can donate to and what they're doing on the ground on my Instagram page, BBC Noel. But there is a lot of local and international NGOs working in Yemen, and ways to support different ways to support the humanitarian situation.
Great, thank you. That's a question that, and as we've gone through the last months of building this project, mounting this project, working with a huge diversity of people inside Yemen and outside of Yemen, it's come up a lot. Like, well, first of all, why Yemen? And there's so many things you could be doing. Why Yemen? And the answer we've all given is I guess obvious. I don't think there's any more urgent need in the world at the moment. There are needs all over the place, but Yemen is in a particularly troubling situation, and I think just like a surgeon, or just like any human being, I think your instinct is to go to where the need is the most critical, the most urgent, and the most immediate. And I think that's reason enough for the entire world to turn its attention more acutely on trying to help what's going on there. But there's also been this people in the world, NGOs who are doing work there. I'd love to hear from the panel about that question specifically. Is what role do foreign NGOs and aid organizations that are trying to address urgent, immediate needs play in Yemen's recovery? And one of the premises of Amal Yemen is that ultimately what we're trying to look towards is a future state where aid is not needed, where self-sufficiency is fully established, and that's part of the goal, is just creating this connection. But to ignore the fact that there is just such a potent immediate need, to me seems maybe not correct. And I wanted to hear what other people feel about that. You're on mute, Darren.
I think someone's got me muted. Thank you. Sorry about that. I think from the perspective of working in many countries through our programming, a lot of it is just continued awareness building through whether like an event like we do with a Cup of Excellence, especially considering a country like Ethiopia, which is in our second year, and working with the USAID and Feed the Future in their program. So much recognition has been given just by doing that kind of an event. So Other coffee companies around the world can do that. Other organizations around the world can do that, just much in the same way that we're working with Amal Yemen to bring people in so they can better understand the culture. But then through that, they also then have a window to actually take action, do something. Talk to people they know, friends, colleagues. I just spread the word. I think that kind of viral activity is more effective than we realize. And this event came from a very organic, kind of passionate experience, just like the Cup of Excellence came from a point of trying to help people and help producers through discovering quality in coffee. And so I think that might be one way, a small way, but it's still a step forward than not doing anything at all.
Yes, indeed. Well said. Does anybody else have a perspective on that topic about where Paris? I think we need to unmute Ferris. Who's got the power? Who's holding the power? I think you're good to go now. No, I still don't hear anything. Can we unmute Ferris?
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, so I think there's an interesting phenomenon. It's a sensitive topic. NGOs, international aid in Yemen. It's sensitive within Yemen also. I think there's definitely a phenomenon that's taking place globally towards Yemen. That's unfortunate. That's driven partly by the economic crisis driven by COVID and the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Yemen. That the size of the crisis is growing, and the size of the size of the aid that's needed by extension is growing, and the international community is struggling to keep up. And you can see that, and you can see in the last UN pledging rounds, then we're not hitting targets, and that's not a criticism as much as it is a reality, a fact. So I think, as you said, Jeff, significant, a real focus and priority needs to be put towards development work, medium to long-term development work, so that Yemen can move towards a position of self-sufficiency, driven by what's happening now, and to avoid a situation where everyone just the international aid community cannot support Yemen anymore, and then you have a serious crisis on your hands. I mean, then the size of the humanitarian crisis is growing year on year. So we need to, and the appetite for donations is to a certain degree declining. So we're potentially heading towards a very difficult situation if we don't start putting protocols in place or safety nets in place.
Yeah, I mean that's something I think Noel spoke to, is like fatigue. People, the whole world's been under pressure because of COVID and the pandemic, and there's suffering happening all around the world, and people, for their own sanity, I think oftentimes tune out, or they get fatigued. And when you talk about a war that's been going on for 6 years and worsening over time in terms of the impacts on the ground, it's it's a difficult place that we find ourselves in, where the appetite to even want to hear sometimes is diminished. Well, I saw you had something to say.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to add something to what Faris was saying, and I mentioned this very briefly in my talk, is the coping mechanisms. Yemen has always been a poor country, even before this conflict. But the coping mechanisms within these communities were so crucial to not have reached the state that it has now. And what I mean by that is, like, farmers, they would basically hire the entire community to work in their farmland, and therefore that's everyone's life being paid for in these communities. And then these people would then help their neighbor who doesn't have a job with food or with whatever they can, and that's what's kept Yemen running for so long. And another thing that we must remember is that the NGOs are really kind of getting the backing and the support from states that they are right now, because a lot of these states are involved in the conflict, and therefore one of the ways to kind of decrease the impact their involvement is having is by giving aid. But what happens when the war stops, which inevitably will happen at some point? What will happen to the people then? The only way that Yemen is going to be able to sustain itself is through these development projects that you're supporting, through these coping mechanisms that I mentioned before. And that's why it's so crucial. Yes, emergency aid is important, but development aid is what's going to sustain Yemen in the long term.
Thank you, Noel. That's, I find that that's something that we've all been struggling with in different ways. Is this this chasm between the idea that immediate investment and donation and development work and relief work is how and where it's compatible with projects that are designed to create opportunity in the future. And that was one of the things that happened with Amal Yemen. As we started out as a group of coffee people who saw that there was a massive opportunity to connect a larger community with Yemeni coffee farmers, and saw that this would create a lot of meaningful economic benefit for coffee farmers in Yemen. But then we added the fundraising element onto the Amal Yemen project because we couldn't think about continuing to work on things that might have a positive future impact when there was such a large hurdle to get past right now, in ensuring that people even can be in a position to take advantage of those opportunities. I want to ask one more question of Faris, which is an interesting one, I think, regarding the idea of increasing production in Yemen. The question is there limited production in Yemen? Is that somehow not more sustainable and therefore ethical model? And I think the question is getting at the idea of value and the high prices in Yemen that are related to the low supply.
Interesting question, you're right. So I think considering the particular socio-economic context of a Yemeni farmer, probably not. Why do I say that? In Yemen, as you saw, coffee plays significant contribution to total cash crops, A. B, there are very few out-of-farm activities. So you have very few farmers who have other economic opportunities off the farm, jobs or civil servants or anything like that. And so the farm really represents the only source of income. And when you superimpose the current crisis that's taking place in Yemen, the number of economic opportunities available are declining rapidly. And so that situation is becoming more and more extreme, which means farmers have to live off this little farm, and they can't. And prices won't, if you know the market, prices won't increase. It's hard to sell expensive coffee. It's very hard. And at the current coffee prices, Yemeni farmers cannot sustain themselves. They cannot. So there's really two ways. It's either you have two levers: either sell coffee more expensively, or grow more coffee and become more profitable. And so that's really the aim, the recommendation for what we see anyway for Yemeni farmers: be more profitable and do that through growing your production. And even the vision that we presented, it's 100,000 tons per year. It's we're not talking about Brazil or Colombia. It's still on the global scale, not massive. But I think it needs to be a move towards that direction. But really interesting question.
Okay, thanks, Faris. We're going to come to the close quickly here, but I have a couple more questions. One for Christoph, which is this comes from Dennis Cote. In some books, it says that coffee came from Ethiopia during 625 CE during the Aksumite invasion. Could there have been multiple introductions to Yemen? And then part two of that question is unrelated to Yemen. So I guess I won't ask it. I'll keep that aside.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Okay, it's a good question in the sense that I don't think we have a precise answer. We have clearly 3 mother populations in Yemen. So either there was only one introduction and then there was like a separation of those 3 mother populations in Yemen, or there were at least 3 different introductions. Those are the most likely hypotheses. But there are also other hypotheses, which is there was a lot more introduction of coffee which did not survive, and only the best survived. So I'm very sorry that I'm not giving a definitive answer. Fortunately, for the geneticists, including in Yemen, with Dr. Hamed from the National Coffee Research Center. Fortunately, there is a lot of unanswered questions, and this is one of them. I think you're muted, Geoff.
Thank you. It happens to all of us at one point or another. I think now I'm getting cues that we're so far over time that it's time to move on to the last segment of this event, which is a short look at the results from some of the fundraising, the raffle, what it is that they might have won. I want to ask whoever can stick around. I'm going to invite everybody back up in about 5 minutes for just a round of thanks and applause and to say goodbye. But for the moment, I'm going to transition quickly to to this. Before we lose too many people, I'm going to share a screen because this is important for all of us to know about, and that is Amal Yemen is not simply this event. Amal Yemen is. Could you push that up onto the screen, please? Amal Yemen is a movement that was started with a simple idea of bringing people together to create more connectivity and engagement around Yemeni coffee, Yemeni food, Yemeni culture. And this thing today that we're doing is the beginning of the Amal Yemen project, not the end. So we've already got through the end of June a lot more programming set up. There's going to be some clubhouse chats where we dig more deeply into specific topics around Yemeni coffee and the Yemeni coffee industry, including questions about supply and demand and the internal challenges to producing more coffee. The questions that I know a lot of consumers have is, why does Yemeni coffee cost so much more than everywhere else? And I think we've examined that a bit today, but we'll get deeper. We also will have art exhibitions. We'll have, for those of you who bought the Amal Yemen tasting kit, the large kit, that one, and by the way, there's still some kits left, so they'll probably be gone within the next couple hours. But if you want to participate in a future tasting and get your hands on these 8 coffees that were roasted, 8 Yemeni coffees that were roasted by people around the world, and also this kit includes some coffee making gear that was donated very generously by one of our partners, Hario. That kit, for those who have purchased it and those who will purchase it today before it's gone, we're going to organize some dedicated tasting events for those on the 18th and 19th of May, and we're going to do 3 of them so that they're spread around to make it most convenient depending on where you are in the world. So if you're in Japan, or if you're in Sao Paulo, or if you're in Helsinki, don't worry, we'll have something in your time zone. We're also going to dig more deeply into the celebration of non-coffee output from Yemen. And as you can, for those of you who haven't yet checked it out, I would recommend you go straight after this into the Amal Yemen website and check out the the Yemen Talent Portal, because that's a place where we're collecting art, music, food, blogging, and all kinds of other content from Yemeni content creators and makers around the world. So that's a place where you can get another side, see another side of Yemen's cultural output that maybe you don't find in one place. And then we'll also be doing some food events around Yemeni cooking. I don't know. I wish I could see a show of hands how many people have eaten a lot of Yemeni food. If you haven't had food for breakfast, you're missing something very, very important in your life, and you need to go do that this week, please. So I'm going to now transition to what I know maybe there's some of you that are still hanging around only because we haven't gotten to this part. That's why I deliberately saved it until the end. I'm going to share the results of one of our fundraising efforts, which is the raffle. Let me see here if I can find it. All right. You can push that guy up onto the screen. Here we go. Where does it stop? Oh, a coffee subscription. Okay, well, that's one of the many prizes that is available in the raffle. If somebody wouldn't mind pulling up the raffle results slide, I don't have that handy, but we'll be, for all those who bought raffle tickets, we had about 50, I believe 50 items in the raffle and several hundred tickets sold. So a lot of people will be getting something. I want to thank all of the people who contributed to the raffle, all of the sponsors, all the donors, the people who submitted coffees and gear and events and all kinds of other things to this. We're grateful for that. And while we're waiting for those results to come up, I also want to remind everybody that the Just Giving donation page is still up, still live. So if you want to go and make a donation to either Mercy Corps or MSF, aka Doctors Without Borders, that page is still up. The link is right there. I can tell you we've raised over $50,000 already, which is amazing, and that's thanks to all of you who've put in, who've been willing to step up and come in and donate something, and we're hoping to get to 100. So, if you know people who you think might want to donate but just haven't heard about it, please forward them the link. And meanwhile, let's see if we have some raffle stuff. If we don't, I'll take this moment to show you something else, which you should know about, because it's getting more exciting by the moment. I'm going to share this tab, which is no, I'm sorry. Let's go here. I'll share this with you. Let's see. Can you see that? So this is the auction. The auction is still live. It'll be live until 2 p.m. London time. So that for those of you in Chicago, that would be, I believe, 8 a.m. Tomorrow morning and 10 a.m. in New York. So this auction, it's not even complete. So those of you who've been to it once and and saw what was in there, you should come back to it, because there is a whole bunch of stuff that's going to go up this afternoon, more Yemeni artwork. But we have original Yemeni artwork. We've got a dagger, Yemeni dagger made with coffee wood. We've got limited edition Comandante blade grinders, or burr grinders that were made for Amal Yemen. There's only 8 of them in the world. Those are there. La Marzocco very generously donated a linea machine, so you could come in and bid on an espresso machine. You could bid on some coffees. These are coffees that aren't available anywhere else, like this Ethiopia micro lot that Royal put in. We've got roasting equipment. We've got all kinds of stuff. So that auction is ongoing, but like I said, it'll be shut down. It ends formally tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern. So please, please go in there if you want to bid on something. Otherwise, I'm going to buy it all for less than it should come to me for. Let's see. Let's go now back to the raffle results. We have those ready to share. Is that a thumbs up or a thumbs down? If we don't have them, that's okay. I don't want to keep people in suspense. Everybody who got a raffle ticket will receive an email with the results for anything you won. If they do become available before we shut down this feed, we'll throw them up. But I really want to just thank everybody here for coming. And I'm not seeing them. No, I'm not seeing them. Let's see. I'm totally stuck on Live Studio. Can't private chat. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe the results are up. Are the results up? Here are the winners. Let me just read them off. Here we go. How about it? Where are they? All right. I'm going to just read a few winners. These are the top 5 raffle items. So somebody won a Comandante Nitro Blade Black Grinder. Farouk Ali Khan. Congratulations, Farouk. Cometeer. If you haven't heard of Cometeer, you need to go check them out as well. They're one of the most innovative companies out there right now, experimenting with different ways to deliver coffee at its peak quality to consumers. And we've got a Cometeer Yemeniya limited edition collection roasted by George Howell and Bird Rock Coffee Roasters. And the winner of that is Bilal Raza. And there's a second one of those who was won by Tom Hopkinson. You guys are going to dig that, I promise. We've got Cometeer Yemeniya also going to Ariel Huang. The World Atlas of Coffee, second edition, written by James Hoffman. That goes to Mohammed Sakrani. The World Atlas of Coffee also goes to Marco Zamora. We've got Rico, digital registration plus a home kit going to Rick van Kukten. And some home barista kits donated by Lavazza. One will go to Yuma Ono, one to Bronwyn Farbrother, one to Kason Moodley. So thank you all for participating in that. I'm now not sure if we're even on the air or not. I heard that things are kind of funky, but I'll bring this thing to a close in case it's still on. I just want to again thank you all for coming, for sharing so much your hearts and minds with us, and your time, because we know it's valuable. Amal Yemen is all about hope, and as Noel wisely reminded us earlier today, hope is most powerful when it is shared collectively by many. And I think it manifests into change as a result of human effort and humans' willingness to work together to uplift each other. On behalf of this whole Amal Yemen team, we're deeply, deeply grateful for your time and your engagement. It's important to know that the more you stay plugged in, the more we'll be able to make this movement meet some of its goals in connecting people and creating opportunity for more Yemeni farmers, Yemeni individuals, Yemeni businesses all around the world. Amal Yemen is a living, breathing organism that was designed with that very simple idea in mind, which is to become a place where people can find each other, to help people unfamiliar with Yemen develop a more meaningful relationship with Yemen, and to help Yemeni people around the world find a bigger audience and connect with people who can appreciate some of the beauty that they bring into this world. If you haven't already done so, please go to the amalyemen.com website and sign up for the newsletter. You can follow us also at Amal Yemen Event on Instagram. Please tell your friends. Those of you who bought the Amal Yemen taster boxes, we'll see you in about a month. And then last but not least, I would like to just invite anybody who's left sitting around back up onto the screen. And I want to give a gigantic round of thanks to the production team that made this thing happen. And I'll just start with Kelly. Kelly is somebody who came on about a month and a half ago to help us stay organized and turn this whole thing from concept into reality. And I can say I think I speak for everyone. We could not have pulled this off without your help. So we're grateful for all of your work. The team at Kima, Adil and Izzy and Chloe and Basil and of course Faris. You guys have carried the heaviest load in making this thing happen, and I think I speak for the entire team when I say we're profoundly impressed by your dedication to it. I know it's taken up a lion's share of time over these last months. And, Square Mile, I want to thank Hesty and Tom for helping this happen, to the Intelligentsia team as well. And to all of the organizers, the sponsors, the donors, the people who have stepped in, the Yemeni people who have stepped in from around the world, from New York, from Toronto, from Calgary, from the Middle East, from Dubai, from Emirates, from Yemen, to make this thing become something more than just a simple one-off idea. And to all our auction and raffle donors, thank you. To Mercy Corps and Doctors Without Borders, or MSF, the work you're doing is invaluable. We can't thank you enough for that, and we hope we're able to give you something meaningful to help that work continue. And then to all of our speakers, Christoph, Jonathan, Darren, Faris. This, I think, is an historic event that hopefully we can reproduce later. And again, you guys are all part of Amal Yemen. You're the organizing team, so you can also thank yourself. But I'm going to thank you. This really is a community, and we talk about it as a movement because that's exactly what it is. It's a movement that grows and gets better and more meaningful and more deeper and more impactful with every new participant. And it's really a manifestation of personal energy. ACE, I can't say enough about ACE. Anna, I think, is probably watching somewhere here. Anna, you've been doing a heroic job making this all work. And Darren, of course. I think ACE's involvement with Yemen will only grow as a result of this work. So we have a lot to look forward to, everybody. So I'm going to stop talking now and let you get back on with your days. I'll leave you with two pieces of advice. One is go find some Yemeni food and Yemeni coffee. Anyone who hasn't tasted either of those, you've been missing something that is powerfully motivating. I'm now addicted. I told Ferris this the other day. I can't get enough of Yemeni coffee. And then please, my second ask is that you tell your friends about Amal Yemen. As this movement grows, it'll become bigger and enable us to have even a greater impact. So thank you very much. We'll see you down the line. Bye-bye.
Take care.